Hello and welcome to Tech Talk, a rather sedentary Tech Talk if I must say. It's the Spanish Grand Prix, that race where I talk about millions and millions of car upgrades. And yes, I will be talking about some of the new bits on the cars shortly. But of course there is a big talking point going on this weekend, an elephant in the room if you like. And I am of course talking about the changes made to the FIA's load tests in China. Of course not. I'm talking about the front wing changes for this weekend. It's what everybody's talking about. But what is so important about this technical directive that affects the front wings of pretty much every single car on the grid and has led to some interesting design solutions? Well, the FIA haven't actually changed the technical regulations. They've changed the limits, the tolerances of how the technical regulations are enforced. Flexible front wings, flexible rear wings, flexible bodywork is all essentially illegal. But of course, it's essentially impossible to ensure that every single aerodynamic surface on one of these cars doesn't flex in any way. So what the FIA do is static load test. They apply weights to different bits of the car and see if they flex. And then they give each team a tolerance of flexibility. And that's what's changed. The FIA has tightened up on some of those tolerances. So to talk you through the basic levels of the test, we've got this front wing here from one of our show cars. And it does allow us to give you a bit of an oversight of how it all works. So to give you a run through of how the load testing works, you have 100 kilos of weight. That's about the weight of me, for example, applied across the front wing with a load pad applied on the outer edge of the front wing elements, around about here. And then on the far side, you have the exact same weight applied, and the weight is applied equally across both in a symmetrical test. In that test, the wing is allowed to deflect by just 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter, or 10 credit cards stacked up. Previously, that was 5 millimeters, and that's changed. So when the load is applied, the wing can only deform downwards by 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter. And that's not very much at all. And the teams have got to be able to get that absolutely right, because if they get it wrong, even by a millimeter, they are going to get disqualified from any event. Or in reality, what will happen is they'll do their wing tests before they actually put the wing on the car, and the FIA will say that wing's good or that wing's bad. The other test that gets applied, and this one's actually slightly harder for the teams to pass, is that 100 kilo load is then not applied equally to both sides of the front wing. It's just applied on one side. And in that test, the wing can only deform by 15 millimeters. Previously, it was 20. Again, dropping down by just 5 millimeters. Small amount, 5 credit cards stacked up. Do it at home. You can see how small that deflection is, but it does make a huge, huge difference. And now the other test that a lot of people haven't really talked about, and I think is probably the most critical of all of them, is a 6 kilo test. And 6 kilograms, what's that for you if you live in America? It's probably a very well-fed cat or a medium-sized dog. That's applied to the upper 2 elements of the front wing, and they can apply it pretty much anywhere along the span. Now, what they do is they want to see if these upper elements deform even slightly. Previously, these wing elements could deform by 5 millimeters, but now they can only deform by 3 millimeters, or 3 credit cards stacked on top of each other. And that is not very much at all. And the teams will actually have to re-engineer their whole front wing structure to get through these tests. The reason being is the wings previously were designed to pass the previous FIA tests. They're not designed to pass these new tests. Now, that's not saying anybody had a flexible wing illegally or any of that sort of stuff. It's just saying they designed the wing to the rules. The rules have changed ever so slightly, and that means that they have to rework the wings. And that's why it's taken until the 9th race of the season for these new tests to be introduced, because if they introduced it at short notice, well, the FIA would have left all of the teams in a bit of a pickle, because they probably couldn't have produced enough wings to get through the race weekend safely without having to revert to an illegal older specification wing. So it had to be delayed until this race. Now, all of the teams pretty much are going to have to make some sort of structural change to their wing. But some of the teams have also seen this as an opportunity to make aerodynamic changes to their wing as well. And to understand a little bit more about how those changes have been applied, down in the pit lane, it's Alistair Hooper chatting to Alan Permain.
Hi, Alan. good to see you here this weekend. Obviously plenty of front wing chat here in Barcelona, but could you just take us through the new front wing that's on your car here this round?
Yeah, of course. The regulations changed quite significantly, as you know, in terms of stiffness of the front wing. So all our wings needed to be remade. We took the opportunity whilst doing that to subtly tweak the aero surfaces. So whilst it is an update to meet the new technical directive, we've also taken the opportunity to improve the aerodynamics as well.
Can you also just take us through kind of what's involved in creating the new wing, whether it's like different carbon fiber arrangements or a different core, bits and pieces like that?
Honestly, it's not my area of expertise. That it's definitely heavier. That's one thing I do know. So I think in a really simplistic term, it's we've obviously tried to be as clever with the construction as we can, but there's more material. Really, the bottom line is there's more material to meet the new stiffness regs.
I found it particularly interesting how Alan Permain said the new front wing on the Alpine is actually a bit heavier than the original version, because not everybody down in the pit lane agrees with that. Alistair Hooper was talking to Inaki Rueda down at Sauber.
Is the new structure heavier than the old front wing?
It actually is not heavier, no. We're talking maybe a few grams here and there, but it's not heavier at all. Okay, so you know there's a new TD in force, yes. It's mainly due to restrict front wing flexibility, okay? So actually, if you look at the front wing, it's going to be very difficult for you to spot what the changes are because they are visible, they're not visible, they're structural, okay? What do I mean by structural? I mean that the wing, as we load it up with speed, flexes less than the previous one, just so that we comply with the new TD.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating and does give us a bit of an insight into the differences between how different teams are managing their composites. The front wing is a hugely complicated piece of engineering, not just from an aerodynamic point of view, but from a structural point of view. Each of these individual elements of the front wing have a very specific carbon fibre layup, and I think we'll probably take a look at that process in a later edition of Tech Talk. But all of those plies, all of those arrangements of carbon fibres and sometimes the cores inside the wing as well have all had to be modified to make a new wing that can actually take the loads past the test, but also work out on track. And that's critical because while passing the FIA test is one element of this, it doesn't mean you're going to be able to look at onboard camera footage as the cars go around the track and see the wings not flexing at all. They are still going to flex because the way a wing works isn't exactly the same as the FIA test. So the wings are designed to pass the FIA static load test and obviously not deflect by too much that the optical contacts will be triggered, but they are still going to be flexing to some degree because when you're putting that much load on through all of the downforce, you are going to see some deflection, particularly on the upper surfaces of the wing, certainly more than the weight of the average large or medium-sized dog. But to take a look at the wider aerodynamic implications of these wing changes, let's take another trip down to the Sauber garage.
Yeah, so look, with the current Formula One cars, one of the things you do is when you're at high speed, these front wings produce a lot of downforce, yes? What you don't want is to have a lot of balance in like turn 9 here, which is very high speed, and then not have enough balance in very low speed. So by tuning the flexibility of that front wing, you actually allow through different corner speeds to have a similar balance, okay? Now, of course, this is very difficult, and it's something that we spend a lot of engineering resources on towards. So while it will not change in one particular place, what it will give us a headache is in rebalancing the car around the lap, if it makes sense, yes?
Well, let's see how difficult it is to see some of the changes on the cars, because on some cars, the changes that the teams have made are very obvious indeed. Actually, I'm going to start with Ferrari. They've introduced these new end plates onto the car, and they are actually really, really interesting, particularly in this area of the rear of the end plate. Now, for me, this is an area that a lot of teams have been playing around with for quite a long time, but Ferrari have taken this to a new level with that vented rear lower quadrant. And I think that's something that's really worth taking a look at because nobody's been there yet. And this is a new area of development for Ferrari. And I'm pretty certain I know where Ferrari got the inspiration for this design element from. So here's the Ferrari design from another angle, and you can see those new parts just around here. And it's really, really clear to see. They've got what I believe to be a 3D printed element at the end of the upper wing elements linking into the end plate. And they're trying to generate a little bit of outwash effect with that. But I'm pretty certain I know where Ferrari got the inspiration from this, because this is not the first time we've seen this in Maranello. Certainly the Maranello wind tunnel, just not fitted to a Ferrari. Here's the Haas. This was from a few races ago. I think this was Saudi Arabia, Jeddah, but we have seen these elements on the Haas for a little while, and you can see where Ferrari has picked up that inspiration. These elements are still part of the Haas today, but Haas aren't using it in the exact same way as Ferrari, because Ferrari have got that vented upper section, a sort of a curved in, if you like, or almost if you look from the side, you can see like a ducted outer lower edge of the front wing end plate. Haas hasn't taken that route. They've just got this stack of aerodynamic elements extending outwards towards the leading edge of the front wheel. Now, this is an area that a lot of teams are still developing, and one of the teams that are still developing it is Haas. And Haas has made a few little changes to their arrangement in that same area of the car, but it's pretty much following the same concept as before, but to deal with those new front wing tests. Red Bull Racing, though, have been exploring this area as well. You can see it quite clearly here. They've taken a slightly different approach to Haas and Ferrari, but they also now have a slightly vented lower section of the front wing end plate, but only from those linked upper two elements of the front wing. Not nearly as complex as the Ferrari version that's linking three elements of the front wing together. So that's a much more advanced version on the Ferrari. Maybe looking at priorities, maybe looking at how things are all coming together. But this area of the car, these aren't the most fascinating designs. I have seen a design in the pit lane that has absolutely blown me away with how beautifully made it is, but also how complicated it is. And in terms of the wind tunnel testing and the CFD, it must have been mind-blowingly difficult to get right and get stable with a car in yaw and a car in different climatic conditions. Nonetheless, let's take a look at the front wing of the Racing Bull. Now, this is not the front wing end plate I'm talking about. This is the old version, just for comparative purposes. And we're looking over here at this same section of the front wing that we've been talking about for most of this episode, actually. Just take note of the shape of that lower segment of the front wing end plate, because I want to show you it from the inner edge as well. This is something that we've been talking about with the last two cars and the complexity. This is what a lot of teams have got. They've started playing around with the upper elements, curling them over, but linking those upper three elements of the front wings to the outboard section of the end plate, probably trying to generate a little bit of outwash. Not really the intentions of the regulations, but they are allowed to do this. So that's what the team's been playing around with. Some of the linkages as well, I think, on the front wings are designed for the same purpose. Now look what Racing Bulls turned up in Spain with. This is the same front wing end plate, but have a look at this area down here. It's absolutely fascinating because you have a section here which is not linked to the main portion of the lower section of the end plate. In fact, it's a complete cutout with these three drop-down elements below it. Now, these are the ends of the wing elements that have twisted through. Pretty similar to what you've seen on the other cars, but it's this cutout above it, this vent that nobody else has really played around with. And I think this is a really fascinating area of development on the Racing Bull. You can see it really clearly from the inner edge as well. Look how clearly cut out that is right over there. You can see where the lower edge of the front wing end plate is, and you can see it's completely remote from this section that links together those three wing elements. And it's a completely different design solution than anything we've seen before. Well, at least anything we've seen recently. You may remember back in 2022, Mercedes had quite a big cutout on its front wing end plate. And I seem to remember that got quite controversial, how they were treating the outer edge of their front wing elements and the main section of the end plate. And they stopped doing it after a while and went for a very different solution. Well, once again, someone seems to be playing in this area. It's going to be really interesting to see how much other teams take note of this little design direction that Racing Bulls have taken, because it's a really intricate, really detailed part of the bodywork, but also really sensitive. It affects everything downstream of it, as we've already heard. And At this point in the season, with a major new rulebook coming next year, the teams have to balance out developing something really intricate, really detailed like this in terms of their CFD allocation, their wind tunnel allocation, and their actual financial wherewithal. Don't forget there's a cost cap in effect against the development of next year's car. Get it wrong, you could end up hurting next year's car and going slowly this year too as a result. But get it right, you could gain some performance this year, but also it won't affect your car too much next year. I think some teams will probably just completely ignore this, looking at you, Williams, and just carry on development on 2026, while other teams who are trying to make their way up the constructors table perhaps, or trying to fight for a position at the front of the table, may be looking very closely at this and coming up with their own versions pretty soon. It's going to be fascinating to see, and we know there's a lot more upgrade action going on in the pit lane. It's absolutely fascinating this season, seeing how teams are balancing out. But for now, I think we're going to have to leave it here because I can't get into all of the front wing bits because there's just so much going on. So thanks for watching here on Tech Talk. There's just too much. It's great. I love it.